Hello and welcome everyone. My name is Malcolm Maestrel and I'm a Membership Services Coordinator with IAAP. Thank you for joining us for today's subject matter expert webinar, Batteries Included Accessibility, a Pragmatic Guide to Get Started Today. We're very excited to have Brett Haymaker with us for today's presentation. But before we begin, we have a few general housekeeping items to go over. Closed captioning is provided. To enable closed captioning, select the CC icon at the bottom of your Zoom screen. The stream text links for English, French, German, Spanish, and Swedish will be posted in the chat as well. American Sign Language interpretation is also provided. Microphones are muted to prevent any background noise or disruptions, and we ask that all attendees please post your questions in the Q&A. The chat will be monitored for general dialogue and technical issues, and today's webinar will be recorded and available in our webinar archives. And we will send out a copy of the recording and presentation to everyone who registered. Now, I would like to turn today's program over to our presenter, Brett Haymaker.
Hello, everyone. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. I'm going to be sharing my screen here. And welcome to Batteries Included Accessibility. It's a pragmatic guide to getting started today. My name is Brett Haymaker. I think we're going to have a great conversation today. One that I believe will alter the trajectory of your entire life. No pressure. I think that just a little bit about me before we jump in. I'm a father and a husband. I'm the son of an industrial electrician, and my relationship with accessibility completely changed when my father began suffering from severe peripheral neuropathy, a side effect of diabetes. And as he began experiencing difficulty navigating physical spaces, I started to look at the world in a different way, and started to experience joy and relief when a building had a handrail or had a wheelchair accessible elevator, or a ramp, something that was easier for him to navigate, right? A button to automatically open a door, all those sorts of things. And I was grateful that those things were considered and designed by a human being, and were available to me and to my father. So as a person who builds things for the web, it dawned on me that whether I wanted to be or not, I was a gatekeeper of digital experiences, and if I didn't take accessibility seriously, and if I didn't make it a first-class citizen as it deserves, that I would intentionally be excluding a whole swath of people for no reason other than I didn't embed accessibility into my craft. So that's sort of how my accessibility journey started. So yeah, let's let's just level set here. So my original intention here was to have a cut and dry technical presentation of focused on tools and or tooling rather that developers can use and employ, and we will get there, I promise. um, Can folks see my Malcolm? Can you see my slides now? I'm sorry, I'm just seeing this message now.
No
Yeah. Okay.
worries.
All
This
right.
is
Cool.
Malcolm.
Yeah. Sorry about.
I'm still seeing my slides in Zoom. I don't think you've taken over the screen sharing yet, at least on my end.
Um. Yeah. I
Oh,
think.
hmm. It must have been something on my end. I see yours now.
Are you guys seeing? Are you guys seeing? Here. Let me do this. I think you're seeing my presentation mode. Um,
Yep,
but
I'm seeing your
yeah, never mind.
presentation.
So my original intention here. Thank you for the call out there. Yeah, there we go. My original intention was a cut and dry technical presentation, and one, I realized a 1 hour webinar is probably not the best format for that presentation. Um, and uh, the most challenging part is that accessibility is such a huge umbrella topic with subtopics and subgenres that it's really hard to decide what you want to actually talk about, right? There's lots of rabbit holes to get lost in, to get distracted by, and so what I want to do first before we get to the tooling is to have a conversation about what batteries included accessibility, like what that might mean and what I mean when I say batteries included. And we'll go through that. But before we get there, I just want to sort of get some what I call honeypots out of the way. Honeypot is it's a common. It used to be a common way of like capturing bots trying to fill out your form, right? It's like a little dummy input um, that they will try to fill out, and you can sort of like reject all that stuff if it's a bot. But I call them honeypots because um, when people are new to accessibility, maybe you're new to this, maybe you're new on your journey, and if you are, that's awesome. But I wanted to highlight some things that are distracting and sometimes discouraging to people, and the danger in that is like you drop off your accessibility journey because you get overwhelmed. That's also sort of the danger in talking about accessibility, is that it's such a massive topic. Um, it's hard to parse. Um, yeah, so let's get into the honeypots. So the first one is a lot of developers sort of fall into the lull here of automating all this stuff away. So they don't, like they'll say things like, don't make me think about it. I just want something that will like do it. I know it's important, but I want to automate it all away. And there are a number of solutions, both closed source and open source, on the market today that um, on the face on face value seem to do this and provide you the ability to do this. Like I'm one example that I'm thinking of right now is from Playwright, or it sits on top of Playwright and it like automates voiceover audits. A lot of these things I have found to be either half baked or the project has been abandoned. And a lot of times people will go into it very enthusiastic. They'll try to use it. They'll burn a lot of hours trying to implement it, and ultimately, it doesn't work, and it doesn't work the way they think it will. So I just want to like sort of acknowledge that like those things exist out in the world, and we are going to set them aside for now. We're not going to talk about how to automate the things away. And we'll sort of talk about like the whole point of this is to not abstract it away so much that you don't have to think about it. The point here is that we want to think about this. It's part of our larger process. The second honeypot is AI. There's of um, a lot of startups now in the space that are trying to use AI. I don't want to come out on either side of this debate on whether or not I think that it has tremendous potential. Um, but from my perspective, for us, for right now, it's a honeypot. It's a distraction, and it's not going to help us in our process yet. Not right now, at least for the context of this talk. And then lastly, the last honeypot, and this is possible for anyone at any point in their journey. This was true for me when I first started. I would say like the first year, where I overused ARIA. I used ARIA everywhere I could, and it was sort of naively, enthusiastically adopting or applying ARIA to HTML. And when I learned that, like when I learned of the like no ARIA is better than bad ARIA, my initial like reaction was to like slink away, and like I felt like bad, and I felt overwhelmed, and I don't want us to slink away. I want us to keep engaged in this pursuit um, of inclusive and accessible digital experiences, or I should say experiences. They don't have to be digital. So those are the things that we'll sort of like acknowledge, and we'll set them aside. Um, so what does it mean for a product to be batteries included? Um, Feel free to drop in chat maybe what you think of when you see something that says like batteries included. I suspect that it'll be one of maybe two. I'm seeing prepackaged, ready to use. Yeah, absolutely. So um, ready to go. Perfect. Yep. So the sort of first variation of this in my mind is like everything I need to fully use the product is included. Um, there you go. A hearing aid works only if there are batteries included, but only as long as the batteries are charged. I love that. Thank you. Um, yeah, you're absolutely right. So, um, uh, yeah, so like I don't need to purchase anything else, or any other products. There's no attachments, there's no augmentations, right? Like everything is there. A variation of that, and a few folks in plug and play. I like that. I didn't see that before. Yeah, exactly right. Uh, those are like variations on what I've outlined on the slide. Is like it's ready to be used straight out of the box, right? There's nothing that I have to do. Um, and I want to talk about the fact that these perspectives are consumer centric. This might seem like a moot point, but I think it is important. It's a subtle sort of nuance here. Those perspectives are coming from the consumer, right? And if we are builders of things, we have to sort of be careful about the passivity of falling into like a consumer mentality versus an active a more active perspective. I don't know what that other word would be other than consumer, but um, the idea is that I'm a consumer, I buy it, it just works. I don't need uh, to know how it works under the hood or think about it. I just, I plug in the batteries, it does the thing, fair play, right? I think like most of us have experienced a product like this in our lives and are grateful for it. Um, I don't think there's anything wrong with it. So like don't interpret what I'm saying as like I'm judging this sort of thing from a software perspective. We encounter this sort of consumer centric um, perspective a lot with component libraries, right? The authors of these libraries, they'll often showcase and advertise that like their component libraries are accessible, right? They have, it's baked in. And I think that is actually it's great. But there's also a sort of a hidden cost that I want to call out here. And so why is this type of batteries included so tempting? The definition that we've established that we're familiar with, right? What comes to mind? There's nothing inherently wrong with this approach, uh, especially if the choice that you have, because we're not always we don't we don't always have control of the types of constraints that we have in our work. So if the choice is I use a component library that advertises, we're accessible, right? Is using that, and I get a lot of accessibility features for free by my consumption of that component library. If the choice is between that and no accessibility or uncertain or uneven application of accessibility, right? Like I'm going to choose the first one. It's a totally viable option. It's a win. And that's sort of what makes it so tempting. And the fact that it's tempting on its own isn't dangerous. But it is dangerous in the sense that, like, I to sort of ground this in a more specific example. Folks here have probably heard of Material UI, right? It's a Google's design system and component library. Um, they they do a really good job of doing, they have some accessibility things, right? But the nature of and I have personally worked in many places where an engineering leader or manager has sort of said like, well, we use Material UI, we don't have to think about accessibility, it's baked in, right? And that's why it's sort of dangerous, because a component library, while the authors should feel pride and should feel good about the thought and consideration that they've put into those components, as a business, they've also prioritized, flexibility as being sort of a core tenet of such a library. So as a consumer, Material UI sort of allows me to do backwards things. It allows me to sort of opt out, and it sort of allows me to do things that break and sort of are at odds with that feature. So I'm calling this out. I'm calling this out because the danger of this is that it is reductive, and that if I believe wholeheartedly that by my consumption of a thing that claims to be accessible, if I believe that my job is done and I have checked that box, right? The danger then is I stop seeking new information, and um, I don't deepen my effort into assessing this thing, right? And so like as my, in this case, software, right? Like software changes every day. It gets iterated on, things regress, changes are introduced, new team members are onboarded. Um, so it's a fluid thing, right? And so for us as a community, to think about accessibility as sort of a feature, um, that's also dangerous. I just want to like recognize that it can be both a good thing and a potentially dangerous thing. Um, and it's sort of I think it's also dangerous in that like we then will then assess and measure our efforts against this sort of false sense of compliance or something, right? Um, so Brett, what's the point, right? We're 15 minutes in. What is the point of this nuanced conversation? And the point is to go like full code on this is that we have inputs and we have outputs, and our inputs influence uh, and steer our outputs, right? You probably have heard the saying, and it's sort of, I don't like this because it's we sort of like lose the meaning of this, but garbage in, garbage out. Um, we are sort of the product of our inputs, and I'm bringing this up because in programming it's fairly easy to evaluate what's an input and what's an output. In this case I have a function, and my inputs are the arguments of a and b, and the output is me taking a and b and adding them together. And so I can be reasonably certain about if I have input a and b, I will have an output of x, and it'll be the same no matter what. Um, so um, this sort of brings me to to TDD, and we're not. This isn't to talk about TDD, but it is related in the sense that with regard to like the danger of um, thinking that you're doing a thing and you're actually not, right? So TDD stands for test driven development. I would say like 1 to 5%, 5% being very generous. Um, the generous side of the spectrum, 1 to 5% of developers actually use TDD. I personally don't, not yet. Shame on me. But I appreciate its value. So the TDD is admired. It's revered as um, a very effective strategy for creating software. Just like some people might think of accessibility being a very noble effort and important and things like that, right? So because of this, a lot of folks, an engineering leader or manager, or maybe they're in product, or maybe they're a designer. It doesn't matter. But in this case, an engineering leader of some kind, they recognize the value of being TDD, right? And so um, pulling from an example from my own past experience. Um, I have been told by engineer leaders, "Hey, we are a TDD shop, and the way we're going to measure that is that we are going to have 80% test coverage on our code base, and we're going to fail our builds in our CI pipelines, right? If the test coverage report that gets generated by our test doesn't meet that 80% threshold, and so forth and so on, right? And that becomes what TDD is. The emphasis is on the tests, right? The tests is what makes it TDD. And uh, that is similar to like, oh, I'm being I'm embodying accessibility by using Material UI, for example. It's like very similar example. It's a sort of conflation, distortion of what the thing is, and it's not it's not a unreasonable thing to do. Right. So um, the point though is that TDD is not about tests. It's not about test coverage, right? That just happened to be how uh, a person commonly tries to assess themselves in adopting this thing called TDD. That they have a sense of it, but they don't actually know what it is. Um, so TDD is actually a am I missing a slide? No. So TDD. Okay, so I'm sorry, I'm getting lost in my own slides. So TDD is it's a methodology where before I write any code, right, I write a test, and then that test is going to fail, and I'm then going to write code that will make that test pass. And the whole point of this is that the test I write, I am encouraged in TDD to think about the smallest possible unit of work that is required to move forward. And I only focus on that thing. And then I write the code that will make the test pass. And then I go back and I write a new test. So in this case, my test could be like, cool, I need to know that a button exists, right? So the code I write is I create a button, right? And then my test will pass. And so I go back and I write another test and I say, okay, I'm expecting my button to have text inside, and this is what I expect it to be. And I'm not saying these are good tests, or this is just an example. And then I add the inner text in my code, and then I quickly go back. And so it's this back and forth, very, very quick feedback loop between what I'm expecting and or desiring in the output, and then the output that fulfills that sort of contract. And that thing could be something accessibility related, right? The uh, the the thing I want to emphasize here is the feedback loop, and the feedback loop that exists in the same workspace here. So TDD isn't about testing, right? We've established that. TDD is actually a design methodology for software architecture, and tests just happen to be the input that we use to drive our outputs. So tests are they're just a form of an input. Um, and to me, that is surreal to think about, because we often conflate tests are just a tool that give us feedback, right? Tests are a tool that give us feedback in a tight loop, and we use that feedback to drive the output. And it's so effective because, one, the tight feedback loop, and the fact that it's co-located. So I don't need to context switch. I don't need to do anything, right? What I want to consider, what I want to invite you to consider is that batteries included accessibility is actually a design methodology, like TDD, in the sense that um, accessibility tools that give us feedback should be thought of as the input that drive the output. To me, this is sort of a transformational idea. So so accessibility, it could just be accessibility topics, concerns, insights that are derived from tools. Those inputs then steer our design decisions that ultimately result in the intangible product outcomes, where accessibility is baked in. So the outcome is sort of matching the the initial sort of interpretation of batteries included, right? It's ready to go, it's baked in. But what I'm proposing is that batteries included accessibility as a design methodology is one that embraces these tight feedback loops as inputs to help us generate those outcomes. Um, and it feels sort of like maybe this is just semantics, and maybe that's true. But I do think that there is something here. And in the scope of our conversation today, right? Uh, ally tools and tools that we're about to take a look at, right? They become sources of insight, essentially inputs that direct your outputs, right? Ally tools provide us information. They provide us an ability to assert and attest our assumptions. They offer suggestions and possible fixes, and they also help educate us to become better stewards of accessibility in the process. And I'll sort of show you that as well in some of the tools, right? All of those become inputs that then drive design decisions for the actual product. And Danielle, thank you. You said that the approach and philosophy matters, and really for folks that sort of evangelize test-driven development (TDD), they will be the first ones to admit like there's nothing special here. It's simply like an intense sort of perspective, a point of view where you put a stake in the ground and you say, I'm going to commit myself to this process, and it's lauded and admired in the industry because of how effectively it sort of governs the outputs. So yeah. So this is a good segue here to like where do you start? Am I missing a point here that I want to make about this? I don't know if I am. No, I think that's good. So let's dive into some of the one point I want to talk about, and this is sort of regarding tools. So why didn't I just jump into a cut and dry technical discussion and just show you the tools? Like, why didn't I do that? And I need to tell you why. So if I were doing this talk about, say, UX design, and I said, this is going to be a pragmatic approach to UX design, and then I immediately go into, this is how you use Figma, right? Does anyone have any sort of idea like why that might not be in your best interest to just jump directly into a specific tool? Feel free to just drop things in the chat if you have any opinion about that. I have some ideas. So Figma is just a tool, right? And there are many different tools that UX practitioners can use and leverage, and some of them are some of them involve visual fidelity and prototyping, like tools like Figma, and then there's other times where it's much more research based, right? And those tools are purely analog, right? Where you're doing ethnographic studies, you're interviewing people, right? Right, exactly, yeah. So to to present accessibility as, well, you can win accessibility, you can win accessibility if you just use these tools. It's misleading in the sense that the tools won't make you a practitioner uh, of accessibility. They're just tools, right? Um, and it's how you use the tool. And so I don't want to fixate on one tool or another. I mean, we'll show you a handful, but the important thing to walk away from here today, to get started, right? It's not to fixate on knowing all the tools. It's going to be overwhelming regardless, right? But the point is, start small and get really, really good with using a single tool, and then move on once the mental load that you need to exert to do that new thing, like once that has sort of like faded away, um, and you have more mental space to dedicate to solving something else, right? Like to something new, then maybe start learning another tool, and folding that into your practice. The fact that you're using a tool at all and that you're thinking about accessibility up front and you're sort of folding it into your process, um, that by far is the most important thing, because the end result is that your imagination is capable of desiring and articulating concerns about accessibility, and that in and of itself is a win. So it's really about like your mind is the best tool, and we're trying to feed our mind things that will help refine our outputs in our craft. Um, so the very, very first thing, and this is again, this is assuming if you are new on this journey, this initially happened to me when I went through the CPAC course at IAAP. So I'm not intentionally calling you guys out, but it is true. The very first time I sort of came across, like I had been doing accessibility work for a while on my own, sort of flailing around. And then when I did CPAC, it was like, oh my God, I had all these like unchecked um, notions about disability that were completely unconscious and unintentional, that were sort of defined for me somewhere else. And when I think also like I started digging into Microsoft's Fluent design system, and they really, really like they make accessibility. Accessibility is like at the forefront of that design system. The way that they talked about the spectrum of disability, right? Um, so I step one, I like if this is new to you, or even if it isn't, to like revisit this, because I think um, it helped ground my pursuit of these things, and it also allowed me to sort of check my own distorted ideas about disability. And I think like the most powerful thing was taking a hard look at and exploring the models of disability. And an example, some examples of different models disability, right? There's the medical model, so like the way a physician might interpret disability. There's the interface model, right, which is like a lot more empowering to into the individual person. And then there's like the charity. They sometimes use a different word, but like you pity and you take. It's like that person has to be looked down upon, and these are just a few of the different models of disability, and it really did like wake me up to how legislation is formed, and um, social and sort of personal identities around disability. I think this is critical to the work of like the craft of embedding accessibility into digital experiences from the perspective of like software and web development. Um, the next smallest possible amount of work in the TDD sort of mantra here is focusing on semantic HTML. And I will say that this, like the the semantic HTML thing, it has an extremely low barrier of entry, but it's a bit like golf. Um, I'm not a golfer. I don't know why I'm using a golf analogy, so forgive me. Um, I tried out for my high school golf team, and after 2 weeks, the coach came to me while I was like on the driving range, and he came to me. He's like, "Brett, you're really great at a lot of things, but golf is not one of them." And I did not make the team. So he very politely escorted me off the team. Um, and the point is that golf is very easy to play, but it's very hard uh, to do well. And I think that semantic HTML is an awesome place to start evaluating and learning, um, because there's a lot of easy wins. But I think that as you go down that rabbit hole, there are and you add more tools to your tool belt, like if you were to use a screen reader, which we'll talk about in a little bit, um, you'll realize that like the things that you did when you first started out with regard to semantic HTML, like you'll learn that like maybe that wasn't the best idea, or you'll sort of come to a place where you'll be like, oh, I did that wrong. And I just want to say like that will happen, and it's okay. Um, the topic will sort of continue to open up and grow as you learn and acquire more knowledge and experience. The second step, um, and this is really huge in my opinion, as far as accessibility and usability, um, is um, is evaluating keyboard discoverability. Um, and I have CSS pseudo states here as well. This really just is sort of a more generic term for this is just visual feedback, right? Like being conscious of the visual feedback that users are getting when they are using their keyboard, as well as their mouse, but mostly when they're using their keyboard. Um, what elements on your page are interactive. This will sort of also build upon, and you might be doing both of these things at the same time. Most likely, most often, you'll be doing these at the same time. But um, as the semantic HTML work, you'll get some stuff for free with the semantic HTML, but there's also like you can override all that with CSS. And so being cognizant of what a user not only like should get, but like what they need to have in order to know where they are on the page as they sort of tab through different elements, or if they use shortcut keys to jump to a different section, things like that. So I just want to call out like that's like a great third step, but to call them steps here, it's sort of like it's not linear. You can sort of jump around, right? But in terms of your overall journey and approach to this, this should give you huge wins with regard to accessibility. And if you do happen to work at an org that is like averse to spending time or doesn't want to justify like time spent on these things from like an engineering perspective or a design perspective. Um, um, I have found success in previous engagements where like we had power users, right? And so it's like engaging like a power user persona. There was like more appetite for that. Then so it was like a way for me to still do the work, but get buy-in from my engineering leaders and whoever at the that specific organization. Can you please explain power user? Yeah, so Iñaki, very, very good question. So this was in the context of a trading firm, and the way that they were describing a power user is someone that um, uses their keyboard like intensely to be like super productive, to like jump around really fast and use shortcut keys and things like that. And so I think that's probably safe to say, although like, you know, power user is a fairly generic term depending on the context that might be different, but that's sort of what I mean when I say power user in this case. So hopefully that answers your question. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for the question. Okay, step four. Um, Again, not necessarily a linear step, but performing an audit. Audits are great. I don't love them in the sense that like it's easy to wait until the end to audit. Um, Audit is sort of like implies like you can like sort of do it at any point in time, or you do it like once a year or something like an accounting, like you're an accountant or something. I don't like that. But really, these things can be very lightweight and nimble, and there's tools built into Chrome or Edge, which uses the same engine as Chrome in your browser, and I'll show you these here in a minute. Um, but you can use Lighthouse and then also DQ. I should mention they should sort of they have a very important role that they play in the community. But they have a thing called Axe Core, and there's a browser extension called Axe DevTools, and I'll show you this as well. But you can use that also. It sort of goes like above and beyond what Lighthouse does in terms of accessibility, and we'll see them side by side. But um, something for you to explore there. We'll give you really great feedback. We'll explore that in a second. And then uh, as an additional step to that, right? There's again, this is another developer tool that you have to enable in your browser, but enabling the accessibility tree. And this is really, really powerful in the sense that it gives you sort of a tree hierarchy of your HTML, but like how the screen reader, like what the screen readers have access to in terms of like what they might spit out in terms of like what they're reading. Um, and it's incredibly powerful, and you can sort of toggle it on and off as you're working on on your app or on your web page. And I love that it like exists in the DevTools as well, because I don't have to context switch. I can just like live in the same space. That sort of helps you to evaluate like and sort of identify opportunities that might not get flagged in like a static analysis of your site. Um, so like you might technically be following semantic HTML, and you might technically be like properly applying ARIA here and there. But when you look at the accessibility tree, it sort of shows you like things that the screen reader doesn't find relevant or does find relevant. And so it's a really, really keen way to assess how is like what a screen reader has access to and sort of how they might use it. And then last but not least, um, and this is sort of like uh, the most time intensive thing in my opinion. But it's also like there's no substitute for this. Also, in my opinion, is auditing the experience, and oftentimes this is like auditing a user flow across a number of screens, um, or tabs, or whatever your app is doing, going through like a user flow that's more sort of comprehensive beyond just a single page. um, Auditing your app using a screen reader, and Mac, you can use VoiceOver. It's a common screen reader. I am a huge fan of the open source screen reader, NVDA. A huge fan of that project, and that's sort of my preferred screen reader. But VoiceOver is also just it's fine and totally adequate. Um, we're not going to go further than that. There's a bunch of other things with regard to yeah. I don't even want to say it out loud. It's just that's enough. So um, to to nope. So I do want to show you quickly what it looks like when I have the accessibility tree. So MDN, also great resource. I have this linked on the slides. Um, I wanted to show you like how I get the developer tools open. So like this might be completely new to you as well. But I can right click anywhere. I can also do like Command Shift I, or Control Shift I anywhere on the page, and I can launch this as well. Um, but this allows me to sort of inspect my HTML here, right? Um, I'm just happy to also call out like the accessibility docs on MDN, which is a literal gold mine. Thank you, Malcolm, for linking that. Um, so I have gone into this thing called accessibility on this panel here, and I've checked the enable full page accessibility tree feature. And you'll have to actually close DevTools after you enable this, and then reopen them for it to compute. And when you reopen DevTools after enabling this accessibility tree feature, you have this button here inside of your elements feature. And if I toggle this, it'll go from my HTML DOM nodes, right, on my page, and it will show what the screen reader is actually, what it has access to, and what it will use to parse. So it gives you useful information, like if a thing is focusable, right? So like that the tab index thing that I mentioned before, like if an element that is non-interactive, it needs to be interactive, right? Like using that. If it's interactive by default, it'll be called out here. Anchor tags or links are interactive by default. But it gives you a sense of like, okay, cool, this is what I have. I think this is really cool. Like it's showing me also hidden navigation items where I can skip to the main content of the page. So this would only be really available if I yeah, so it's sort of a thing. You can see it highlight as I tab through. It sort of only becomes visible when I'm using tab, by the way, to sort of move my way through those elements. And it'll show itself, and it'll shift focus if I then click it. But really cool, right? So like I can use the accessibility tree to audit very quickly, and I just switch back. And if I'm interested in a specific button, right? So like we'll go to breadcrumbs, for example. If I highlight it here and I toggle back to my DOM tree view, it'll highlight that element. Yeah. Adrian Grace asks, Is there a course, video, or tutorial to walk people through how to use this accessibility tree and DevTools? I'd love to learn more and use it. So 100% there are. I link to a long form course at the end of the slides. Yep, also Marcy Sutton Todd is a master. She changed my life. But yeah, Chrome Developer Tools, they also have access, but I will find some links and I will share them with Malcolm that you can share with the group later also. But great question. Yep. So for that's a accessibility tree. We have a couple minutes left, so I just want to touch on the other tools I have. So in my developer tools here as well, I have a thing called Lighthouse, and this plus button, right? I can sort of add different sort of things. There's lots of tools. There is a you don't need to be a Chrome developer tool expert. You don't need to be aware of or use all of these things. I don't use a handful of these. I've never even opened a handful of them. These also change over time as browsers are updated. Like 3D view, I've never once clicked on this, and I refuse to click on it now on the fly. But in that menu, there will be an option called Lighthouse, and I've already run this, right? But Lighthouse allows me to run a static analysis on a number of things. So can I'm going to clear it, right? So to give you a better representation of what you have. So you have, I want to evaluate the performance. Performance and accessibility are linked in a lot of ways, right? Best practices, SEO, accessibility here is really what I really want to capture. And then you can pick a different mode. So like we'll just go with the default, and then you just hit analyze page, and so it's going to go through and it's going to audit your page on the things that you selected, right? In this case, it's auditing the MDN web doc, so I expect this to be pretty good. It's also auditing on like 2G and 3G speed, so it's like throttling your network. Sometimes it throttles your CPU throughput. Not great. Probably from my own Chrome extensions though. So I'm glad that they're calling that out. But it gives you things, this is regard to performance. But what we're concerned about is accessibility, and they actually knocked it out of the park here, right? So they will flag things for you in Lighthouse, like links rely on color to be distinguishable. So this is like one thing. Low contrast text, they're calling it out. They provide a link to documentation that you can like learn more about that specific thing. They take a screenshot. They highlight the actual DOM node that is the that they're actually talking about, right? The failing elements. And this is useful, right? This is useful feedback. I do believe this is recorded as well, Hina. So I do believe that it can be shared. There is a number of other things that you have to manually check, right? So interactive controls are keyboard focusable. So like this is where I was using the tab key and sort of going through. It's really hard to automate that away. So it'll call those things out. There's past audits, so there's like static analysis here. So again, it shows you, teaches you, helps you learn about different things if you want to go down that particular rabbit hole. Lighthouse is just a great tool in general. But if you want to take this a step further, I have installed the Axe DevTools browser extension. And you can get that here. This is from DQ, right? And there is like a paid version of this. I'm not using that paid version, but I'm going to show you what you can do for free. And really the only thing that you can do is the full page scan. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that. This will only work if you sign in. If you don't sign in, it'll show you an error message that isn't actually helpful or accurate. But I'm going to do the scan, and it's going to assess this page. I can download this report. I can rerun the scan, right? But I think this is really awesome because it's showing me not only what my total is, but I can toggle like best practices on and off. So it like the verbosity and sort of number of things that it will highlight for me of what I can improve will change if I toggle this. And it's also telling me the WCAG version that it is using to assess my site. Now, if I were to pay for DevTools, if I were to pay for a pro account, I can actually toggle this to different levels. Yes, Malcolm. I can toggle different levels of WCAG. I can pick different versions, things like that. Really, really useful. But if I do go into my my actual issues, you can see like this is way more thorough than Lighthouse, and it tells me like how I can fix it. I can also highlight the thing that it'll like automatically scroll there in my page. This is like really, really useful stuff. So those are just some of the tools that you have at your disposal. I will now defer to Malcolm. I want to thank you for attending today, and I really appreciate the questions and engagement throughout this webinar. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Brett. We greatly appreciate you sharing your knowledge with us today. It was a great presentation, and it was lovely seeing so many comments in the chat. And I also want to thank our ASL interpreters, Beth and Julie, and our captioner, Caitlin, for their wonderful work, as always. And for upcoming IAAP webinars, we have on August 15th, as part of our Built Environment series, a workplace journey to accessibility. On August 21st, we have the next webinar in our digital accessibility series, Project Manager, Product Owner, Crucial Roles in an Accessibility Program. And then wrapping up the webinars for August, we have on the 22nd, a subject matter expert webinar, IAAP and Teach Access present what everyone should know about digital accessibility with Sarah Horton and David Sloan. And for those who are not yet a member of IAAP, we welcome you to join our network of over 6,500 accessibility professionals in over 100 countries. All IAAP members get complimentary access to live professional education webinars, as well as our library of archived webinars, access to our connection to networking platform, free courses, and more. And any who are interested can sign up at accessibilityassociation.org or email info@accessibilityassociation.org to see how they can become an IAAP member today. Once again, thank you for joining us today, and thank you to Brett for such a great presentation, and I hope everyone has a great rest of their day.